Welcome all our Christian believers. Our channel, Pray for Blessings, is hosting a deep conversation about God love. Chapter 7, Christian Combat Against Evil, Faith, Prayer, and Practice.
Hello and welcome to Pray for Blessings.
We're glad you could join us today.
In this chapter, Christian Combat Against Evil, Faith, Prayer, and Practice, we're going to take a deep dive into some really profound themes.
That's right. We'll be looking at faith, prayer, divine protection, and how these traditions understand navigating life's challenges and adversities.
We're drawing insights mainly from the Bible and related traditions. The goal here isn't just to list things, but to really explore the connections, the practical wisdom.
And maybe some unexpected insights along the way. So where should we start?
Well, the absolute foundation that comes through loud and clear is prayer. It's presented as just, essential.
Utterly essential. Not just, something you do now and then. It's framed as the core communication channel with God in, certainly the broader Christian tradition, and echoed elsewhere too.
The breath of spiritual life, as you said before we started recording.
Exactly. Woven right into the fabric of belief.
And the purpose of this communication, the texts highlight seeking grace, guidance, mercy, but also, very strongly, seeking deliverance. Deliverance from what worries us, from troubles, from, anything that disrupts our peace.
Precisely. And you see this reflected in structured prayer formats, too, like the Book of Common Prayer, which gets a mention.
Right.
It offers a framework, a language for people to voice these very specific needs, asking for help, acknowledging God's presence, seeking refuge when things get tough. It gives you words when maybe you don't have them yourself.
That structure idea is interesting. It leads into the concept of daily prayer rhythms, the daily office in Christian tradition, or the daily services in Jewish practice, like Shekarit, Mincha, Mariv.
Yeah, those are key examples. And the insight there isn't just about praying at certain times.
No.
It's more about infusing the whole day with an awareness of God. These rhythms create a kind of sacred architecture for your time.
Anchors throughout the day.
Kind of like that, yeah. Anchoring ordinary moments, waking, midday, evening, in that consciousness of the divine. Morning prayer, for instance, is often positioned as a time for gratitude, for consciously dedicating the day ahead to God.
And evening prayer.
That's presented as this regular liturgy that balances things out: scripture reading, confession, praise, and petitions for yourself and others. It's a way to kind of process the day and wrap it up with that spiritual focus.
Underlying all of this, especially when facing uncertainty or praying for specific things, is this recurring theme of trust. Deep trust in God.
Absolutely fundamental. Trust in his plan, his timing, his power. It comes up again and again.
There are some really potent lines quoted about God's power.
Yeah.
That he can do infinitely more than we can ask or imagine.
A powerful statement.
And that he's always more ready to hear than we to pray.
Right. And framing trust in that way is presented as crucial for the believer. It's positioned as essential for finding real peace, for lessening stress, especially when you're in those uncertain situations.
Like when you're praying for something specific, like finding a partner or wanting children.
Exactly. When you're in that space, the ability to genuinely entrust those hopes, those anxieties to God, it allows for a different kind of peace. A peace that isn't totally dependent on getting that specific outcome right away.
Resting in his capability, his willingness.
Yes. Knowing he's able and willing.
Now here's something that adds a really fascinating layer, potentially shifting how we think about prayer. The material brings up the Jewish concept of hitpela.
Ah, yes. Hitpal.
Yeah.
Which can be understood as meaning to judge oneself.
To judge oneself. How does that relate to prayer?
Well, this is a key insight. It challenges the idea that prayer is only about asking God to change things out there.
Yeah.
Instead, this perspective suggests a primary goal is internal transformation. It's about self-assessment, looking inward, working to align yourself with God's will and nature.
So less about changing God's mind and more about changing me.
Precisely. It's a turn inward. Seeing prayer as a tool for refining your character, clarifying your own spiritual state, it adds a whole other dimension to just petitioning.
That is a significant shift from change my circumstances to let prayer change me.
It is, and this acknowledgement of God's active role extends everywhere. There's a key verse highlighted from Psalm 145, part of the daily Jewish morning prayer, Ashrei.
Which one is that?
You open your hand to satisfy the desire of every living thing.
Satisfy the desire of every living thing.
Wow, that's expansive. Incredibly so. It's this foundational declaration of divine providence. It asserts that God's care, his provision, extends to every single creature in every part of life.
So it means seeing both good things and bad things.
As falling under his purview, yes. It grounds prayer not just in our little needs, but in the huge reality of God sustaining the entire universe.
Okay, so we've got prayer as essential communication, rooted in trust, woven into daily life, aiming for transformation as well as petition, all within this context of God's constant provision.
A solid foundation.
And that foundation becomes really vital when we move into the next major theme, facing adversity, opposition, even what's called spiritual combat.
Right. And for that, the Bible, especially the Psalms, offers this incredibly rich language, a vocabulary for crying out in distress, for seeking divine protection.
The material points to a lot of specific examples. Psalm 32.7, talking about God as a hiding place.
Preserving from trouble, surrounding with shouts of deliverance, it's a very immediate sense of safety in God's presence.
Then Psalm 4.1, God as a fortress, a defense.
And Psalm 5 builds on that. Verse 11 talks about finding refuge leading to gladness. And verse 12 describes God defending the righteous, covering them with kindness like a shield. These are active, strong images of protection.
Psalm 27 stands out too, that bold declaration. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom then shall I fear?
Such powerful words.
The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? It even talks about confidence when surrounded by enemies, by war itself, and seeking deliverance from adversaries, from false witnesses.
It really speaks to an inner state of fearlessness that's rooted in God, even when the outside world looks terrifying.
Psalm 31 has these urgent pleas. Bow down your ear to me, make haste to deliver me. Calling God a strong rock, a house of defense.
And asking God to be a guide, a strength, to pull the psalmist out of the net laid by enemies. It acknowledges the danger, the cunning of opponents, but appeals to God's greater power and wisdom for rescue. And it notes, the Lord preserves those who are faithful.
Psalm 34.19 is quite blunt. Many are the afflictions of the righteous. No sugarcoating there.
No, it's realistic, but it immediately follows with the promise. The Lord delivers him out of them all. And verse 22 reinforces that God delivers the souls of his servants who trust him. So, yes, trouble is real, but hope is anchored in God's deliverance.
Then there's Psalm 56.9. Whenever I call upon you, then shall my enemies be put to flight. This I know, for God is on my side. That's pure confidence.
It is, a declaration that God's presence guarantees victory over opposition. And verse 11 follows up. Trusting God removes the fear of what mere mortals can do.
And Psalm 144 shifts the imagery a bit. Verse 1 blesses God, my strength, who teaches my hands to war and my fingers to fight.
That's a striking image.
And then it just piles on the titles. My hope, my fortress, my stronghold, my deliverer, my defender, in whom I take refuge, who subdues the peoples under me. It's not just passive hiding. It's God equipping for the struggle and being the source of victory in the struggle.
Exactly. This whole collection of psalms, and others mentioned, they give believers the words to cry out, yes, to express fear, but ultimately to place their hope and confidence squarely in God's active power and presence, no matter the threat. Human enemies, difficult circumstances, even unseen forces.
And one psalm is specifically highlighted, Psalm 91, called the Warrior's Prayer or Soldier's Psalm.
Yes, that one is almost entirely focused on divine shelter, safety, protection. Finding security under God's wing in a dangerous world.
It starts with that foundational promise, doesn't it? Whoever dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty.
And then, I will say of the Lord, he is my refuge and my fortress, my God, in whom I trust. Psalm 91.1-2. It frames it as a state of being, something you actively choose to dwell there.
And the result of dwelling there?
Deliverance. From the hunter's snare, from deadly plagues, finding defense under his wings, being covered by his faithfulness like a shield and buckler. Protection from terror by night, arrows by day, pestilence in darkness, sickness at noon, Psalm 91.3-6. It's this powerful declaration of divine protection, rooted in that Old Testament understanding of God's faithfulness.
Moving from the songs, the New Testament gives us another really vivid picture of spiritual opposition in Ephesians 6, the armor of God.
A really pivotal passage for understanding this idea of spiritual conflict in Christian thought, and it starts by clarifying the real enemy.
Right, for our struggle is not against flesh and blood,
but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Ephesians 6.1-2. It explicitly reframes the battle as spiritual, happening in unseen dimensions.
And then it lists the equipment God provides. Not physical armor, but spiritual qualities presented as armor.
Exactly. The belt of truth holding everything together, the breastplate of righteousness protecting the core, feet fitted with the readiness from the gospel of peace enabling movement, the shield of faith.
With which you can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one. That's quite an image.
It is. Then the helmet of salvation protecting the mind. And finally, the sword of the Spirit.
Which is the Word of God.
Yeah.
Ephesians 6:1-4-17.
So you have truth, righteousness, peace, faith, salvation, and God's word. Each piece vital. Faith actively deflecting attacks. The word as the weapon for engagement. It's a picture of complete reliance on God's character and provision.
And crucially, right after listing the armor, it says to pray in the Spirit on all occasions with all kinds of prayers and requests. Ephesians 6:18.
That connection is key. Prayer isn't separate from the armor, it's integral. It's like the power source, how you effectively wear and use the armor. The whole instruction to stand firm starts with being strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Ephesians 6:0. The strength comes from him, accessed through faith and prayer.
Facing adversity also means persevering through trials, through temptation. The Bible acknowledges this is common, right? 1 Corinthians 10:33 says, "No temptation has overtaken you except what is common to mankind."
Yes, it normalizes the experience. You're not alone in facing temptation. But right after that comes the promise based on God's faithfulness. And God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, he will also provide a way out so that you can endure it.
So God's faithfulness is tied directly to our ability to endure. He limits the trial and provides an escape route or the strength to get through it.
That's the promise. And this idea of God protecting through trials fits with prayers like the one from the BCP. O God, the protector of all those who trust in you. Asking for defense and guidance through the things temporal, the stuff of this life, so we don't lose sight of the things eternal.
The material also brings in a specific theological view on suffering from one source, framing it as carrying the cross with patience, uniting your will with God's.
Yes, this perspective suggests that for sinners, suffering in this life can be seen as a kind of necessary chastisement.
Meaning?
The idea presented is that accepting the suffering with goodwill, out of love for God, can actually bring peace and might even deliver one from eternal punishment, leading towards heaven.
That's a challenging perspective on suffering's purpose.
It certainly is.
Yeah.
It shifts the focus from just wanting deliverance from pain to potentially seeing pain, when embraced in faith, as a path to purification and deeper union with God. It's presented as one specific theological viewpoint found in the materials.
Okay, so we've covered prayer foundations, facing adversity with divine protection and spiritual armor, and different ways of looking at suffering. Let's shift now into some of the deeper, maybe more mystical dimensions of prayer that come up, particularly from Jewish mystical traditions like Kabbalah.
Right. This is where we get some perspectives that might be less familiar but offer really interesting angles on prayer's power and effect. Kabbalah explores the inner dimensions of reality, God, the universe.
And the sources suggest that prayers and righteous actions within this framework aren't just passive requests.
Exactly. They're seen as having a real profound impact on the spiritual realms.
An impact that can then show up in the physical world, like blessings or changes.
That's the idea presented, that prayers literally affect the mystical forces of the universe and even participate in repairing the fabric of creation. Every word, even every letter, is thought to carry precise spiritual weight and effect, working to bring down divine light, restore balance.
How might that viewpoint enrich, say, a Christian understanding of prayer?
Well, the suggestion is it moves prayer beyond just asking God to do something for you. It presents it as a dynamic means through which God works through the person praying to influence both spiritual and physical reality, a kind of active partnership with the divine.
Interesting. Another concept mentioned is Kavanaugh, intentionality in prayer.
Yes, Kavanaugh. Focused intention or direction. Kavanaugh are described as specific directions of intent that guide the prayer's ascent through the spiritual worlds, potentially increasing its effectiveness within that Kabbalistic system.
So it's not just the words, but the focus, the sincerity, the inner direction behind them.
Precisely. The idea that every word, even every letter, has a precise meaning and a precise effect is meant to inspire deeper mindfulness and reverence. For any person praying, this could translate into cultivating that sincere, focused intention, moving beyond rote recitation to really engaging the heart and mind, directing the prayer with purpose.
The material also mentions the Kabbalistic idea of the end of correction, tikkun, transforming egoistic desires into altruistic ones.
Right. This framework suggests that a major goal of spiritual life, including prayer, is this deep interchange, seeking God's help to identify and overcome negative, self-centered traits and cultivate qualities of giving, of connection. It sees spiritual growth as this ongoing process of refinement.
And there's mention of this being a gradual ascent, sometimes framed as 620 steps.
Yes, that mystical framing of stages in correcting one's inner nature. While the specifics belong to Kabbalah, the core principle that spiritual growth is a disciplined path needing divine help can resonate more broadly. It encourages viewing prayer and obedience as intentional steps towards the Creator.
And this links back to embracing challenges.
It does. Within this tikkun idea, challenges are often seen as the very opportunities needed to confront and correct those egoistic traits, building deeper faith and resilience along the way.
Another striking idea presented from this perspective is that God is inside of us. The Creator is within the observer.
This really emphasizes God's immanence, his presence within creation, within the individual. The sources suggest this can deepen a Christian sense of the Holy Spirit's indwelling presence. It makes prayer incredibly intimate, not just talking to a distant God, but engaging with the divine who is present within you.
And finally, there's the idea of the physical reflecting the spiritual, and humanity as a microcosm containing the universe within the soul.
Yeah, this worldview emphasizes deep interconnectedness. It suggests our actions, including prayer, don't just affect us, but can ripple out and influence the upper world, the spiritual dimensions. It's another layer presented for understanding reality.
Wow. So putting it all together, prayer emerges as this incredibly multi-layered activity. It's about trust, defense, transformation, and potentially this dynamic interaction with spiritual reality.
That's a good summary of the picture painted by combining these different perspectives, and the sources then take these ideas and apply them to very specific, very human areas of life.
Like finding love, a partner.
Yes. The Christian perspective presented stresses that preparing for a healthy relationship starts with your relationship with God, and then with yourself.
Getting spiritually grounded, personally whole before seeking partnership, that's the foundation for dating wisely.
Exactly. And again, that theme of trusting God's timing and plan comes up strongly here. In trusting the worries, the anxieties of the search to God is key for peace.
Proverbs 18.22 is quoted, "He who finds a wife finds what is good and receives favor from the Lord," framing it as a blessing, a sign of God's favor.
And the BCP offers prayers that can be used here. Prayers for guidance, asking for help to align your actions with God's will. Prayers for wisdom to avoid false choices.
Makes sense. And a prayer for trustfulness during worry is mentioned as relevant too.
Yes, acknowledging the emotional roller coaster it can be. Even the informal practice of say a little prayer for a future husband or wife is noted, showing that desire to involve God.
Then there are the Jewish concepts. Bachert, the destined soulmate idea.
Right, drawing from Talmud and Zohar. This idea of divine matchmaking, souls paired before birth, and righteous deeds helping that reunion happen.
And ahava, love, linked to have, to give, emphasizing selfless active love.
Yes, and the sources draw a direct parallel to the Christian concept of agape love, that self-sacrificial love from 1 Corinthians 13.
The two becoming one flesh from Genesis 2, reaffirmed by Jesus, is also mentioned, resonating with souls merging. And love your neighbor as yourself, Leviticus 19.18, as foundational.
Moving on to bringing children into the world, this journey is acknowledged as deeply personal, often emotional. Prayer offers peace, hope.
And again, trusting God's timing and plan is central, especially when facing difficulties with conception.
The material points to specific prayers. For patience, for trust, for fertility, for a healthy pregnancy, even for miraculous conception, citing Sarah and Hannah as examples of God acting beyond the natural.
Prayers for the couple's relationship during this time are important too.
Definitely. And the BCP marriage prayer asking for the gift and heritage of children is referenced, framing children as a gift, tying into Psalm 127.3.
The Jewish mystical view adds more layers here too, right? The commandment, be fruitful and multiply. Pru urvu.
Yes, understood mystically as not just biological, but a spiritual act, bringing new souls into the world, participating in creation.
Prayer itself seen as having an active role, awakening from above,
Mm.
influencing mezal or destiny related to children.
That's the concept presented. And again, the idea that spiritual transformation, tikkun, might allow someone to rise above a difficult destiny, like childlessness. Also, the Talmudic idea of God, Father, and Mother as three partners in forming a child, emphasizing God's deep involvement.
What about health and healing?
The Jewish tradition of adding personal prayers for healing within the Amida prayer's Rifenu blessing is noted.
And the Christian perspective.
Generally presented as healing being God's will, provided through Christ's sacrifice. There are different emphases noted, some encouraging, expecting, or commanding healing as a right, others stressing that prayer's effectiveness comes solely from God's power and will. But the agreement is that healing ultimately comes from God.
And finally, material success.
We circle back to some Jewish mystical ideas here, linking specific prayers or letter sequences, like Anabaikoch, to blessings and prosperity.
The Zohar suggesting righteous prayers can open the supernal channel for divine fortune, mazal.
Yes. And the idea of transforming your spiritual DNA, overcoming negative traits to remove judgments and allow material blessings to flow, citing Jacob's prosperity as an example.
And the general principle. Whoever wishes to receive blessings should do so through prayer, speech, and devotion, underscoring that active role.
The material also rounds things out with some broader biblical context and historical notes. Snippets from Paul's letters give us glimpses into the early church.
Like from Romans, about Christ fulfilling promises to Jews and bringing Gentiles in, themes of unity.
And 2 Corinthians, showing Paul's concern for the Corinthians, fearing they'd be led astray, warning against false apostles. You get a feel for the challenges.
Philippians 1 offers that beautiful pastoral prayer of thankfulness, confidence in God finishing his work, praying for their love to grow in knowledge and discernment, leading to righteous lives.
It really highlights that focus on ongoing spiritual growth and integrity. Notes on 1 Thessalonians and textual criticism just remind us these are ancient texts requiring careful study.
The historical context of Paul within Second Temple Judaism is important too. The conflicts over Gentile inclusion, circumcision.
Yes, the sources note these were key factors in Christianity distinguishing itself from Judaism over time. Understanding that history is helpful.
Simon the Zealot is mentioned briefly, one of the 12.
And the lesson drawn is powerful. Jesus transcends politics. Simon, committed to overthrowing Rome, followed Jesus, whose kingdom is eternal. Following Jesus offers salvation, a higher allegiance than any earthly cause.
Some notes on Christian-Jewish relations add more historical context.
Mentioning the idea of a shared spiritual patrimony and the call for dialogue.
And some historical factors in the separation of the Roman tax, fiscus judaicus, Christianity being labeled an illegal superstition, superstitio illicita.
The use of aposynagogues, synagogue expulsion in John's Gospel, and the possible dating of the Birkat Haminim, a curse potentially targeting Christians, these are presented factually as contributing elements to the eventual split.
The Dead Sea Scrolls get a brief mention too, just noting their existence and availability for study.
Providing context on the study of biblical-era texts.
And finally, a very brief mention of prosperity theology.
Just outlining it as a viewpoint described in the source of it criticized by some denominations, its core tenets being the Bible as a contract guaranteeing prosperity and atonement alleviating sickness poverty seen as curses, presented neutrally as described.
We have really covered a lot of ground today, from the basics of prayer and trust, through facing adversity with God's help and spiritual armor,
to exploring these deeper mystical dimensions, applying faith to life's big questions like love and family, and touching on historical context.
It seems clear that faith and prayer in these traditions are presented as incredibly dynamic, not just asking, but transforming, participating, defending, enduring.
Absolutely. It's about active engagement with God and the spiritual realities described.
So as we wrap up, reflecting on all these different facets, prayer as self-judgment, Hillel, prayer influencing spiritual realms, Kabbalah, the protection language in Psalms, the armor of God, the varied views on suffering, maybe something for you, our listeners, to think about is this. How does understanding these diverse dimensions challenge or maybe enrich your own approach to prayer, to communicating with the divine?
And how might these insights perhaps change the way you view and navigate the challenges that you face in your own life?
Definitely gives us a lot to mull over.
It certainly does.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive today.
Yes, thank you for listening.
We hope you'll join us again next time. Be sure to listen to our channel Pray for Blessings for our next chapter, exploring these important subjects.
Goodbye for now.
You were listening to Pray for Blessings. Our subject today was God Love, Christian Combat Against Evil, Faith, Prayer, and Practice. We hope you had enjoyed our deep conversation and we invite you to join our next chapter.